Germany built the most feared tank of the Second World War, the first operational jet fighter, and rockets that touched the edge of space. But for 6 long years, its engineers could not solve a problem America had cracked before the fighting even began: putting a reliable semi-automatic rifle into the hands of the ordinary infantryman. While every GI who waded ashore at Normandy carried an M1 Garand, most German soldiers fought from the first day of the war to the last with a bolt-action rifle whose basic design dated back to 1898. It was not for lack of trying. Germany poured money, factories, and some of its finest weapon designers into matching America's advantage, and failed again and again in ways that bordered on the absurd. The story involves design requirements so impossible that engineers had to break them just to build a working gun, and it ends with a bitter twist. When Germany finally found its answer, it did not come from America at all. It came from a rifle pulled out of the Russian mud. So why did the nation of engineers lose the rifle race? The answer begins with 3 impossible sentences. The bolt-action world. To understand what Germany was chasing, picture how a rifleman actually fought in 1939. Every major army, British, Soviet, Japanese, German, sent its infantry to war with bolt-action rifles. Fire one shot, and the weapon goes dead in your hands. You drop your cheek from the stock, grab the bolt handle, lift, pull back, push forward, lock down a Modernization, and only then hunt for your target again. A trained soldier could manage perhaps 15 aimed shots a minute. Under fire, with shaking hands and a pounding heart, far fewer. Military planners accepted this because they believed something that sounds strange today, that the rifle barely mattered anymore. Machine guns would do the killing. Riflemen existed mostly to protect the machine guns. A semi-automatic rifle, one that fired with every pull of the trigger, no bolt work needed, was dismissed as fragile, expensive, and wasteful of ammunition. Generals also feared what a faster rifle would do to their supply lines. Millions of men burning through cartridges faster than the trains could deliver them. Only one major power rejected that thinking completely. In 1936, the United States made a bet no other nation on Earth was willing to make, and by the time German soldiers understood what that bet meant, they were already on the receiving end of it. The Garand's Edge. The bet was the M1 Garand. John Cantius Garand, a quiet, Canadian-born engineer at the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, had spent more than 15 years perfecting a single rifle. Gas-operated, chambered for the powerful .30-06 cartridge, fed by an 8-round clip that loaded in one push and ejected with a distinctive metallic ping when the last round was fired. In 1936, the U.S. Army adopted it as the standard weapon of every rifleman, the first army in history to do so. No one else followed. Britain stayed with the Lee Enfield, Japan stayed with the Arisaka, Germany stayed with the Mauser. On the battlefield, the difference was not subtle. It was horrific if you were on the wrong side of it. A German soldier with his Karabiner 98 Kia fired once, then had to break his aim to work the bolt. In that same window, the American facing him could fire 2, 3, 4 aimed shots without his eye ever leaving the sights. Now multiply that across a full squad in a Normandy hedgerow. American infantry could pour out 2 to 3 times the aimed fire of the men shooting back at them. In a firefight, that volume decided everything. It decided who kept their heads up and who pressed their faces into the dirt. And the side pinned in the dirt could not aim, could not move, and could not win. German veterans of the Bocage learned to dread the sound of it. Not the slow, spaced crack of rifles, but a rolling wall of fire that never seemed to pause for a bolt. Even reloading barely slowed it down. The empty clip pinged away, a fresh one pressed in under the thumb, and the rifle was firing again in seconds. The men who lived through it understood exactly what they were holding. In January 1945, General George S. Patton put it in writing to the Army's Chief of Ordnance. "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." Patton was not a man famous for handing out praise. He had driven the Third Army across France and into Germany, and he had seen what that rifle did in the hands of 19-year-old draftees. And America did not just design the rifle, it buried the world in it. Springfield Armory and Winchester produced more than 4 million Garands during the war. At the peak in January 1944, American factories turned out more than 122,000 of them in a single month. Nearly a third of what Germany's entire semi-automatic rifle program would manage in the whole war. Berlin's ordnance officers were not blind to any of this. In 1940, the German army finally ordered its own semi-automatic rifle. Then it wrote down the requirements and doomed the program before a single prototype was fired. 3 impossible sentences, the G41 disaster. Here they are, the 3 impossible sentences. When the German army invited Mauser and Walter to compete for the new rifle, it attached conditions. First, no holes could be drilled into the barrel to tap gas for the loading mechanism. Second, the rifle could have no moving parts on its outer surface. Third, it had to include a bolt-action backup so a soldier could keep shooting if the self-loading system failed. Read that last one again. The army was ordering a semi-automatic rifle while openly planning for it to break. It tells you everything about how little faith the German high command had in the very idea. And the first rule was even worse. Bleeding a small amount of gas through a port in the barrel is exactly how the Garand worked, and how virtually every military rifle on Earth works to this day. It is the clean, proven solution. German doctrine forbade it, haunted by the fear that a hole in the barrel would ruin accuracy and durability. The fear was misplaced. The rule stood anyway. Locked out of the obvious answer, both companies reached for a nightmare, a gas trap. A cone-shaped cap sat over the muzzle, caught the blast as the bullet left the barrel, and shoved a long rod backward to cycle the action. Think about what that means for the man carrying it. Hot, filthy combustion gases churning inside a cap at the very tip of the rifle, the hardest place to strip and clean. While German ammunition left corrosive salts behind with every shot. Extra steel hanging at the muzzle, making the rifle front-heavy and exhausting to hold on target. A soldier in a frozen Russian trench, fingers numb, trying to scrape carbon out of a fouled muzzle cone in the dark, knowing his life depended on it. The complaints from the front all said the same thing. Too heavy, too delicate, too hard to keep running, and never enough of them to matter anyway. Mauser's version, the G41M, obeyed every rule, including the bolt-action backup. It was a catastrophe. Of 6,673 rifles built, 1,673 came back as unusable. 1 in 4 returned by the very soldiers who were supposed to trust it. Walter's engineers made a braver choice. They simply ignored 2 of the 3 requirements. Their version won the contract, and more than 100,000 went east to Russia. There, in the dust of summer and the murderous cold of winter, the gas trap fouled, the action jammed, and soldiers cursed a modern rifle many of them trusted less than the bolt action their fathers had carried. And here's the bitter part. While German engineers wrestled with a weapon strangled by its own rulebook, the solution was already lying in the snow ahead of them, stamped with a red star. Too little, too late. The G43 and the STG-44 question. The Soviet Union, the country German propaganda painted as primitive, had fielded more than 1 million Tokarev SVT-38 and SVT-40 semi-automatic rifles. The Tokarev did the simple thing German rules had banned. It bled gas through a port in the barrel and used it to drive a short piston. When the invasion of the Soviet Union brought captured SVT-40s flooding back in 1941, German frontline soldiers prized them, and many carried the enemy's rifle in place of their own. Ordnance officers shipped them home and took them apart. Walter copied the Soviet gas system, refined it, mounted it on the body of its earlier rifle, and added a 10-round detachable magazine. The result, adopted in 1943, was the Gewehr 43. The nation that set out to out-engineer America ended up reverse-engineering Russia. The G43 worked. It was cheaper to build, easier to maintain, and finally reliable. It was also 7 years behind the Garand, and it arrived as Germany's war was collapsing. Between 1943 and 1945, factories working under bombing raids and material shortages produced roughly 400,000 of them. For every semi-automatic rifle Germany built in the entire war, America built 10 Garands. The G43 was never the standard infantry rifle. It trickled out a few per company, and many were fitted with scopes and handed to snipers instead of riflemen. The ordinary German infantryman carried his bolt-action Kar 98K to the very last day of the war. From the gates of Moscow to the hedgerows of Normandy to the streets of Berlin, the German army fought the largest war in history, mostly with a rifle from another age. Now, some argue this whole story misses the point. That Germany leapfrogged the semi-automatic rifle entirely with the STG-44, the world's first true assault rifle, a weapon so far ahead of its time that its DNA runs through nearly every military rifle since. And the STG-44 really was revolutionary. But as a defense of Germany's rifle program, the argument collapses on the numbers. Only around 425,000 were ever made. It arrived in force in 1944, far too late, and reached only a fraction of the army. By then, American factories had been outproducing every German rifle program combined for years, and no wonder weapon was going to close that gap. Germany did not leap over the semi-automatic rifle. It stumbled past it, and 9 out of 10 of its soldiers were left holding the weapon of a previous war. Which brings the story back to the question it opened with, because the real answer was never about engineering at all. Germany lost the rifle race because its army did not trust its own engineers. America gave John Garand 15 quiet years and one instruction: make it work. Germany gave Mauser and Walther 3 impossible sentences, waited until the war had already started, and then discovered that a nation fighting on every front could never afford to stop its factories and begin again. The scars of that decision showed on every battlefield of 1944 and 1945. Picture a German soldier in a shattered town that final spring, 17 years old, working the bolt of a rifle his father could have carried at Verdun. While across the rubble, an American his own age fires 8 rounds, hears the ping, and slams in a fresh clip, without ever breaking his aim. The nation of engineers did not lose the rifle race to American genius. It lost to its own rulebook.